A small town on the outskirts of Havana was the scene of a strange paranormal event in the 1930s. It all started on a sunny morning when a strange beggar arrived in town. He was a mysterious man, he talked with a foreign accent, he had a long beard and clothes that although poor were not dirty or damaged. The man looked weird but kind. The beggar first wandered around the town without having a fixed destination. He first went to the jeweler's house. The jeweler was the fourth generation of men who worked this fine trade. The perfection and creativity of his pieces had achieved him fame in almost the entire country. The townspeople said that even a president of the republic had ordered jewelry for his wife. Ambassadors from foreign nations had also come to the small town to ask for the services of the jeweler. The beggar knocked on the door 3 times, a woman answered the door, annoyed by the stranger's interruption, and opened the door violently. "What do you want?" "Increpo grossera Cecilia, the lady who did the housework in the jeweler's house." "Hello," answered the gentleman, "I have just arrived in town and I have no money. I wonder if you could give something to eat. Anything would satisfy me, even if it is an old piece of bread." "This is not an inn," the woman replied with red cheeks of rage. "Every bopti always come here to ask for due or money. This is not an inn or a bank." "I don't want anything free," said the gentleman. "If you have any work I could do, I will gladly do it to earn something to eat." "No, there is nothing," Cecilia shouted, and closed the door in the face of the man. With an expressionless face he turned and walked out of the property. He walked a few blocks and stood in front of the house of Don Goyo, a man who had amassed a considerable fortune after growing up in poverty. Don Goyo was the son of Spanish immigrants who had settled in Cuba after fleeing the difficult economic situation in Spain. Don Goyo's parents arrived in town and began working in the house of a retired judge who had a huge farm. The judge never had children and his wife had died years ago. Don Goyo and Goyo's parents worked on the farm from dawn to dusk for a miner's salary and for living in the farm's shed. Since childhood, Don Goyo was skilled in business and learned everything he could about working the land. The parents of Don Goyo and Goyo not only worked on the farm but also took care of the judge with great dedication. In gratitude, the judge left the farm to the parents of Don Goyo. Goyo's father was stubborn and did not want to change anything. Although Goyo knew that he could make a lot of money, his father did not let him develop his ideas and they continued to live in poverty. It was not until after the death of Goyo's father that the boy was able to develop his ideas and become a wealthy man. The beggar knocked on the door of Goyo's house, who opened the door. Although he came from poverty, Goyo quickly forgot his origins and was haughty and condescending to those who had less. The beggar repeated the question he asked at the jeweler's house. Goyo looked at the beggar with a disgusted face and refused him food or a job so that the beggar could earn some bread. With the same expressionless face, the beggar left Goyo's house. He wandered around the village for a while, but did not knock on any other doors. While walking down the street, he met one of the sisters from the nearby convent. These sisters were an especially charitable order that took care of the abandoned elderly. The beggar approached the sister and said, "Sister, I am hungry, and I have no money to eat. You would be so kind as to give me something to eat or give me some job in the convent to earn me something to eat." The nun practically ignored the beggar, with a forced smile answered, "No, son, I have no money and I am rushing to a meeting because the bishop comes to the parish today." The rumor was that this particular sister was not the most pious soul in the convent. The rumor of the people of the town was that the nun had been forced by her father to enter the religious order for having embarrassed the family. The story that was told was that the nun's sister had a boyfriend who had been the nun's secret love since childhood, but never had the courage to declare her love to the boy. She lived bitter for years to see how happy her sister was with the man she loved. On December 24th, as usual, the family gathered to celebrate Christmas Eve. That year they invited the boyfriend with his family since he had asked for the girl's hand in matrimony, and they were engaged. The date of the wedding had been set for February 2nd, the day of the Virgin de la Candelaria, the patron saint of the town. That day the nun took advantage of the fact that her sister's boyfriend had drunk some wine and confessed her feelings and kissed him. The confused and half-stunned boy reciprocated the kiss. After that day, they began to see each other in secret. These encounters went on for a month until one day the nun's sister began to see her sister different, always on the defensive and sneaking out of the house to see someone. Curious, the sister one day followed her to get the biggest surprise of her life. There was her sister kissing and having sex with her boyfriend. The sister let go a sigh as if her soul had left her body and ran. Although the lovers tried to chase her, they could not reach her. She managed to reach her father and told him what had happened. Filled with rage, the father took his shotgun and blew the boyfriend's head off. Horrified by her father's act and devastated by her fiancé's death, she took her own life. The father left his daughter no choice but to become a nun to cleanse the family's shame. Without much desire to live, she accepted her fate, and from that day she lived embittered in the shadow of a convent away from shame. The beggar continued to seek the help of a charitable soul but had no luck. Under the hot midday sun the beggar took shelter in the shade of a tree at the outskirts of the village. Some boys playing baseball threw him out of the vacant lot because they were playing and the beggar was in the middle of the playing area. The boys told him to leave, that he was in the middle of the field, but he asked them to let him rest. The boys refused and began to insult him. Even the parents of some of the boys began to insult and mock him. The beggar stood and looked at them all and said, "Now you laugh at me, but before the sun goes down I will laugh at all this town." And as a biblical act the beggar walked to the other end of the village and on the outskirts of the village shook off the dust of the shoes. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon the sky turned a gray so dark that it looked as if it was night. Ramon, an old man who lived in the town, was returning from Havana and said, "This is not right, there is something supernatural. A curse fell on this town and made a U-turn driving away in the opposite direction of the town. A powerful tornado landed in the center of the village and made the same route as the beggar walked earlier. In the jeweler's house destroyed everything. It destroyed even the foundations. Cecilia's body was found 3 days later in the middle of a field on the outskirts of town. Don Goyo's house suffered significant damage, but he suffered the worst damage, the strong gusts of wind threw dust, wooden pieces and other debris that ended up leaving him blind. The same tornado landed in the Goyo's farm and dried the well forever. In that place there was nothing left, and although later they tried to open other water wells, from that land they could never get another drop of water. Don Goyo died years later, in the streets, blind and without a peso in his pocket. In the sisters' convent a wall was knocked down, killing the nun that denied her help to the beggar, wounding 2 other sisters and the visiting bishop. Of those who were on the vacant lot playing baseball, no one remained. The same tree where the beggar was in the shade, fell on the boys and their parents who sought refuge under its branches. 13 were the total victims of that tornado or curse. At 6 p.m. started the funeral of the 13 bodies in the church. The relatives of the deceased and the brothers of the religious community mourned the death of their loved ones. The town was all silent, everyone was in mourning. Being such a small town, everyone knew each other or were related in some way. The crying was such that it was heard throughout the village. But before the sun went down there was a powerful laughter that resounded throughout the town. They searched everywhere to see if they could find the one who rejoiced in such a disaster, but it was in the vain. Some say that it was the beggar so that his prophecy was fulfilled.
He looked over and
Others
tried to
that it was
recognize
only
her.
the paranoia of the people.
After all, living in a
But for
small
old
town,
Ramon,
everyone
a
knew
man
each
who
other,
understood
but he
these
did not
paranormal
recognize him.
things, that was the visit
Madden
of a
saw
being
that it
who
was
came
getting
to taste
dark
the
and
town,
stood
and
up.
after seeing the darkness
When he was
that lived in
passing
these
by the
people's
lady,
hearts,
he greeted
was
her,
allowed
and the
to
lady
invoke
returned
dark
the greeting
forces
and
to
said,
punish that
"If
town.
you want those who did this to you can pay dearly." Martin was surprised. How could that lady know what had happened to him? "We old people know everything," she replied as if she had been reading his mind. "I don't know what to say," answered Martin. "I don't know why they did this to me." "Yes, you do. It's because of Claudia. That wretched woman has a soul as black as her father's. I know you like her like most of the guys in this town, but she's bad. She is bad like her father. She was the one who sent them to beat you, son. Her father has also done a lot of wrong. That man almost killed your father today. When you get home you will see, and every day Claudia and her father will humiliate you more, and every day they will make you more contempt, and every day they will abuse you and your father even more. But if you want, I can stop all that. See you here in 3 days." Worried, Martin ran to see if his father was okay. Entering the house, he saw that the father was lying on the ground with a swollen face and a broken leg. The father was in very bad shape. So Martin ran out to get help. And as he ran, he saw the village priest coming in his car. The father stopped and saw the despair of child. "My father is dying, father. Please, come and help me." The priest entered the house and saw in the conditions that the man was. With the help of Martin, the two put the father in the priest's car and took him to the nearest town. The father remained at the hospital for 2 days until he died from the beatings. Poor Martin felt more alone than ever. Fearing what would be of his life, he no longer had anyone to take care of him. Now he was left alone, without a mother, without a father. Martin only had a few relatives who lived in the capital, and it would take a few days for them to reach the town. Martin would have to bury his father alone. As he went to the cemetery with the priest, he was thinking about what would become of his life. After burying his father, the priest invited Martin to stay at his house for a few days. "So you can wait for your relatives to get here, and you would not be alone." Martin accepted and asked the priest to leave him alone for a few moments, and that same afternoon he would go to the parish house. Martin looked at his parents' graves with deep sadness and helplessness. He knew Claudia's father was responsible for his father's death. The love he felt for Claudia had now become the bitterest of hatreds. High blood boiled just thinking about her. Suddenly he heard a familiar voice, "I am sorry, son." Raising his eyes full of tears, he saw there in front of him the lady in black, again standing in front of the grave with her black dog. "I told you, son, that I can relieve that pain in exchange for 2 small favors." "How can you do anything, madam? You are already old, and those people are very rich and very bad. I do not want them to hurt you." "Do not worry, son, they cannot touch me. If you want me to help you, just promise me to do 2 things, 2 small favors. You have nothing to lose. Just do as I say. Take soil from this tomb," pointing to the grave that was in front of her, "and today at 12 o'clock at night. Go to Claudia's house. Knock at the door and throw this soil in front of the house. The rest of the throw it at the muzzle of the black dog that is lying in the portal and leave." Martin got his pockets full of soil from the tomb and left the cemetery. At midnight Martin was in front of the imposing door of the hacienda, threw the soil on the ground, and at that moment the guard dog came at him, the same dog that always walked with Claudia's father. The dog came with the intention of attacking Martin. But before the dog approached, Martin threw a handful of dirt in the dog's eyes, and the dog became meek. And having done this he knocked 3 times at the door. The house he shivered. Those blows contained all the pain of Martin. Following the instructions of the lady, he left the hacienda walking, accompanied by the dog. Claudia's father went out of the house in search of the one who had dared to knock at the door in that way. He took a flashlight and a machete and walked around the house. Suddenly, Claudia's father was frozen. In front of him was a huge black bull pulling dirt from the ground with his right front leg, and before he could lift the machete, the bull charged him with all his strength with a headbutt. It took his breath away. The bull walked over him, broke all the bones of his legs, and when the bull finished attacking him, left him for dead and left. When dawn came, everyone started looking for the boss. They found him in the middle of the field unconscious. The employees picked him up and they took him to the house. One of the employees took the car and laid the boss in the back seat. He was accompanied by Claudia and one of the employees of the house. Go to Dr. Montez's clinic in the People's Square. When Martin woke up that morning at the priest's house, he noticed that the dog was lying under his bed. He left the room and found Maria, the lady who was in charge of helping the father. "Come, son, let's make some breakfast." Martin hadn't tasted a bite when a man burst into the kitchen. "Where's the father?" "Last night something attacked the boss and he is very bad. He will need the last rites." "The father is out of town," Maria replied as she left the kitchen. Everyone went out to the square and Martin saw that Claudia's father was being carried on a makeshift stretcher. As she passed in front of the boy, Claudia's father was full of blood and his legs looked like jelly. At that moment, Claudia and Martin's eyes crossed, and as if he had received an order, that fierce black dog threw himself on Claudia's face and bit her face. Out of nowhere another black dog appeared and got a hold of Claudia's left leg. Claudia's screams and the growls of the dogs were horrific. At that moment, Claudia's father regained consciousness and saw how the dogs were destroying his daughter. Some of those present tried to stop the attack, but those dogs were fierce. From the crowd a man came out and cut one of the dogs with his machete, killing him instantly. The other dog disappeared. Martin was confused, dumbfounded. He didn't know what to do with the whole situation. The same curious people took the injured and entered the clinic of Dr. Montez. With the scarce means he had, the doctor tried to save both of their lives. The doctor sent the girl to another village where there was a hospital. But because of the fractures that the father had, it was impossible to move him. The best solution would be to amputate his legs, concluded the doctor. If they moved him, he could die. The same bones could puncture his arteries and cause him to bleed out along the way. The two were in a very bad state. They probably wouldn't survive. Martin felt guilty and began to cry. Peter, the gravedigger, a great friend of his father, who was next to him, said to Martin, "Do not weep, son, that was the justice of God. Everyone here knows that he killed your father. Those people did a lot of damage in this village. The money he had was actually stolen from his wife's family. God forbid that he does not survive." Martin ran through the cemetery expecting to meet the lady, but there was no one there. Martin returned to town and asked several people for the cemetery lady. He gave the description of the lady, but no one knew who she was, so Martin decided to return to the cemetery and wait there. Martin was tired. The events that had occurred earlier had strained his nerves too much. Tiredness caused him to fall asleep again, and suddenly he woke up startled to find the lady again, there in front of the grave. "What did you do that to Claudia and her dad?" "I did nothing and only granted your desire for justice." When Martin was going to continue recriminating the lady, she interrupted him. "I did my part. Now it's your turn to do yours. Go to Claudia's hacienda, and behind the house there is a dry well. Go down the well and you will find a bag. Take it out and bring it here. After that, dig in this tomb and put the bag next to the bones that rest here." Martin was scared, but he felt he had to do what he had promised the lady. After all, the lady had avenged his father. Martin did as the lady instructed. When he arrived at the hacienda, he did not see a soul. The house was wide open. Things were thrown away, and there was nothing of value left. What they didn't take, they broke. Nothing in the house was saved. Martin tied a line and went down. The bottom was dry well. The soil was hard and he didn't see any bags. He looked all over like crazy, but didn't see anything until he had the idea to dig. He took a sharp stone protruding from the wall and began to dig the earth from the bottom. He digged for a long time. He was exhausted, but he couldn't find anything. He was about to give up. When a piece of the wall of the well began to collapse, Martin was frightened and was going to run away when he saw a piece of material sticking out of the wall. He began to pull it. Until he managed to pull it out the hole, it was a sack full of bones. When Martin saw the content, he ran like crazy to the priest's house. When he arrived, Mary fed him and went to bed in the room she had prepared for him. Martin lay down and finally fell asleep. In the middle of the night he was awakened by an intense cold, a cold that froze his bones. Even though they were in the middle of summer, one of the hottest he had ever experienced. He began to search and look around for something to cover himself from that cold when he saw a black shadow. A shadow blacker than the darkness itself in the corner of the room. He covered his face to avoid seeing it and began to pray. A deep voice said to him, "Keep your promise, keep your promise, keep your promise." Martin wasn't able to sleep for the rest of the night. He just waited until it was the early hours of the morning to finish his part of the deal. As soon as the first lights of the morning were seen, he ran to the hacienda to collect those bones. Once he had gathered the courage to put those bones in the sack, he headed for the cemetery. There he found the gravedigger's tools and began digging in the indicated grave. The earth was hard and dry, and although the other tombs were covered by grass, that tomb was totally bare. It was only the earth, nothing grew on it. Suddenly someone took the shovel from his hands. Peter the gravedigger, his father's good friend, told him, "You cannot play here and definitely not in this tomb. That is the grave of the wife of the patron." "Claudia's mother is buried here?" "Yes, and if everything continues as it is, they too will be here very soon." "What is that sack?" he said, opening the bag. Peter jumped back and said, "Boy, where did you get that from? Look, this town is a mess. Don't get into more trouble. You just lost your father?" "Leave that. I'll take care of those bones. Go." "I can't. If I don't do this, the woman is going to hurt me, like she did to Claudia and her dad." "Who's going to hurt you? What happened?" "You can trust me. You know your father was my friend." Martin began to tell Peter, who was losing his composure while listening to the story. "That lady you saw must be Soledad, the mother-in-law of the boss, but that lady has been dead for many years. That lady was the owner of everything that Claudia's father has now. She was a widow and had only her daughter, Claudia's mother. The boss appeared one day at the hacienda looking for work and Soledad gave him work. He got into the house little by little, until he managed to marry the daughter, Claudia's mother. She was very good, but she was a woman of very weak health. When Claudia's mother became pregnant, she was taken to a hospital in the city. And they say that there she died during childbirth. There were complications and she died. One day no one saw Soledad again. The boss said that she had left with relatives because she was very old and had not overcome the loss of her daughter. Some of those who dared to ask ended up dying, others became very rich. The thing is that no one else asked where was Soledad. But son, if you made a pact with the spirit, you have to pay it. If you breach your promise to a deceased, the spirit can destroy your life. It can even take you to the grave. Soledad asked me for two things. One is this, to bury the bones here. And the other one I still don't know what it is." Peter opened his eyes like saucers. "Never do that again. If you don't know what they want in return, do not enter into an agreement. I'm going to let you do your part of the deal, but not now. The town is very upset because the boss didn't die. Some of his employees stole everything they had in the hacienda, and there are rumors that the city police will come to investigate. Go back to the priest's house and come when it gets dark." Martin arrived at the parish priest's house and asked Maria if she knew anything about Claudia's father. He was alive, but both legs were amputated and he couldn't move. Claudia has very severe damage to her face. She was disfigured, she lost an eye, they say she is in very bad condition, and the hacienda was looted. They say they stole everything last night. Even the animals. The city police came, but they don't know anything and nobody wants to talk. Well, don't worry about that and eat something that the father asked me to take good care of you. Martin could not even eat because of the anxiety, and when the sun went down he immediately went to the cemetery. There was Peter, who had begun to dig the grave. I'm getting ahead of your work, son. It won't be good for you to be here after nightfall. Finally, they reached the remains that were in that tomb. Martin deposited the sack and said a prayer, covered the pit, and went home to rest. The next day Martin's relatives arrived. They were his mother's cousins. They wanted to take him to the city. Martin was ready to leave all that behind. The cousins were teachers and wanted Martin to study. Once again, Martin accepted, for he had nothing to lose. That same day they will return to the city, but first he had to say goodbye to his parents. He was alone for a moment in front of his parents' grave. When he was leaving, he saw Soledad standing in front of her daughter's grave. Now I give you my second request, build a beautiful grave here for me and my daughter. And for the rest of your life, come and visit me. Where I'm going to get money from? Don't worry, you will be a very rich man, but make sure you use some of that wealth to build me a dignified grave. If you don't, Martin, you will pay for it with your life. The year you don't come to visit me, that will be your last. Martin left town, studied, and became an important lawyer. Every year without fail he went to the village to fulfill its obligations. He built 3 tombs, one for his parents, one for Soledad, and another one for him. His wish was to be buried next to his parents the day he died. The year in which he was going to marry, he made him his yearly pilgrimage accompanied by his girlfriend, and while they were eating in a small restaurant in the square, a woman approached with an old man in a wheelchair. The legs of the old man were missing. The woman's appearance was terrifying, she was all disfigured. He was dirty and missing an eye and smelled very bad. The old man also smelled very bad, the clothes were ragged. The two came over to ask for bread or leftovers, they just wanted something to eat. Martin recognized the woman immediately. It was Claudia, all her beauty was gone. Her face was now a reflection of his black and twisted interior. The owners of the village now were 2 poor beggars eating leftovers. "Do you remember me?" asked Martin. But the woman seemed alienated. Her hands and head were shaking, and the old man didn't even move with his eyes fixed and his mouth open. Then one of the waiters came and threw Claudia into her father out. "Go, do not disturb the gentleman." Martin was surprised, because he had not seen them again since the attack of the dog. He had heard rumors of the painful situation in which the two were. Martin wanted to hear the version of the new generations and asked the waiter, why are they in this situation? Weren't they the richest in the village? Yes, but after the day of the attack the world fell apart for them. The boss lost his legs and had a stroke when he saw that 2 dogs were attacking his child. People took advantage of the fact that the boss was injured and stole everything. When the police came and started investigating, they realized that the boss didn't own anything. The hacienda belonged to his mother-in-law, and he had no documents to prove that he owned it. In addition, even if they had the documents to prove ownership of the property, that ranch is no longer useful, the land is dry and bare, nothing grows there, not even grass. Everything is as if the fire had devoured it. I remember when I was a kid, how everyone was in love with Claudia, the cutest girls in town. Today everyone despises her. Martin fulfilled his promise to visit Soledad's tomb until the last day of his life, passing away at the age of 97. Martin was buried next to his parents.